carnivore harder is not always the answer. We get these people almost daily that come to us and say, carnivore didn't work for me. All I did was gain 20 pounds. You're pushing somebody away from a lifestyle that could help them because you're being dogmatic about it's got to be this one approach to carnivore. We just say, instead of 2 fatty ribeyes for your day, pick the first one a tenderloin. And guess what? They start shedding weight. They feel amazing. And it works.
What if eating a steak every day, the ultimate healthy diet, could actually backfire for some people? Today's guest is Craig Emmerich, engineer and metabolic researcher. For over a decade, he has helped thousands of people heal by focusing on what actually works. We are going to dig into lipotoxicity, gaining weight on the carnivore diet, and when fat stops being fuel and starts being a problem. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's dive in. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so glad to talk to you and pick your brain about a slightly controversial issue. Walk us through lipotoxicity in simple terms. What happens when fat becomes toxic in the body?
Well, thank you for having me on, Lauren. There's basically a situation where, and I learned, strangely enough, when I was like a teenager, I learned about our fat cells and how you after a certain age, you stop making lots of new fat cells and you just fill up and empty the ones you have. Something I learned a long time ago. Thought it was kind of interesting. Never thought it would be so impactful later in life, but basically what happens is for each person then, through genetics, through other factors, they end up with a certain threshold, or what called personal fat threshold, where it's like you have a limit in the amount of fat that you can store in your body. You have a certain number of fat cells in each person. Each person has a certain number, whether it's a lot of fat cells or very few fat cells. And once those fat cells, the fat cells themselves have a membrane, and that membrane can only stretch to a certain amount or it'll burst like a balloon, right? You fill a balloon up too much anymore, boom, it's burst and you got a problem, right? And these fat cells have a protective mechanism to make sure that doesn't happen to them. And what they do is when they get to a certain size, they start rejecting insulin. They become insulin resistant, and they reject insulin so that so more fat doesn't get stored in them, so they don't burst. Well, the problem is when you have a small number of fat cells on your body, and they get the ones you have get stuffed and inflamed and start rejecting insulin. Now the fat starts to accumulate in places you don't want it, in the bloodstream, high triglycerides, in the liver, fatty liver, in your pancreas, fatty pancreas. All these metabolic syndrome things start to happen, high blood pressure, all these things, downstream effects. And so this can happen when you have very few fat cells. So you can actually be, we've seen this quite a few times. We had one woman, 110 pounds and type 2 diabetic. She had genetically so few fat cells, they filled up so quickly without her gaining a lot of weight. She became type 2 diabetic, insulin resistant at 110 pounds. We've also had people that were 300 pounds and you look at their blood markers and they look pretty much fine. Triglycerides are fine, fasting insulin's fine, because they have a lot of fat cells on their body and they're not all stuffed yet. So you're not getting to that threshold. So lipotoxicity is really basically just you run out of storage space for fat on the body. And so adding lots of extra fat in the diet, where's the body going to put it? The fat cells are like, I'm not taking fat anymore. So what happens? Triglycerides shoot up. You have we have multiple cases, multiple examples of this, of people eating strict carnivore, but following the very high fat version of that, and their triglycerides shoot up, their fasting glucose shoots up, their fasting insulin shoots up because they're getting too much fat into the system, too much energy, in this case fat, and not enough storage space to put it.
That's a really great way to explain it, and it's in a way that we can easily understand too. I like the balloon bursting idea.
Yeah,
Now,
it's very similar.
yeah, are there certain people who are more vulnerable to lipotoxicity? Have you noticed any patterns in that?
Yeah, actually, the Asian population genetically typically have a lower fat threshold. And that's why you see there's a lot of diabetes occurring in Asia, but not as much obesity as we have here in America. And some of it, you can go, I don't know if this is just one of my theories. Many Americans come from the Northern Europe, genome, if you will. And so that is a northern climate where you had to store more fat to make it through hard winters, along the equator. Maybe you don't have to. And I mean, that's not absolute. There's examples either way on that. But yeah, there's, certain populations where they'll get insulin resistance without gaining much body fat. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where there are, so I said, most people, when we're a certain age, we stop creating lots of new fat cells. There's genetic exceptions to that too. They're kind of rare. There's not a lot of those people out there, but we did have one as a client. His name was Tyler. Um, this is Tyler. He was 645 pounds, and we did blood markers on him. So if you see somebody that size, you're immediately thinking sky high triglycerides, his insulin has to be through the roof. Fasting glucose has to be really high. Metabolic syndrome is what you're looking at, right? Well, these are his labs. I'll just show you the little screenshot there of him. You can't read them there, but I'll show you the values. His fasting glucose was 50, which is kind of low for some reason. In this case, usually it's around 90. His fasting insulin was 3.5. His triglycerides are 77. His A1C 5.6. His HOMA-IR, which is the ratio that tells you kind of your insulin resistance states, 0.4. He's completely insulin sensitive because he's one of the few people that can keep creating new fat cells, even though he's 38 years old.
Wow.
Most people, when they're young, they stop having that ability to do create new fat cells, and he genetically can. And so he basically has no limit into he could. And I think maybe a lot of the people that like the 600-pound journey, and those people that will get that big, I think it's because they are the genetic exceptions that they can get that big and gain that much body fat.
Wow. Wow. I'm so happy for Tyler that you were able to help him. Now,
Yeah,
the
he struggles with food still. He lost about 150 pounds, and he's still, there's so many aspects to weight loss that are outside of food. You can know what to do and you know what works, but there's still a lot of, emotional, different components to it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, those markers that you showed us, are those the main ones that you look for to know if someone is dealing with lipotoxicity?
Yeah, one of the really good ones is your fasting glucose and fasting insulin, and then you calculate a HOMA-IR from that. And that gives you a pretty good idea of whether you're insulin resistant or not. And the insulin resistance primarily derives from overstuffed fat cells. So if you are registering pretty high insulin resistance on the home IR, pretty good indicator that you are exceeding your fat threshold. Another good one, they don't really have a metric like home IR for it to gauge, but your fasting triglycerides and your fasting insulin. So just like glucose shouldn't be high if fasting insulin's high, insulin's job is to drive that down. If your triglycerides are high and your fasting insulin is high, that means it's insulin struggling to get that fat stored where it should go. So that's another good way to look at it.
Quick break because I have to share something that I've been loving lately. I have tried so many electrolyte powders over the years, and honestly, most of them either have junk ingredients, they have a weird aftertaste, or they mess with my gut. SALTR is the way electrolytes should be made. It has super clean, unrefined Norwegian sea salt that's naturally rich in minerals and tests lower in heavy metals than other brands. They use magnesium glycinate and potassium gluconate, so it's actually absorbable and gentler on your gut. And get this, even the citric acid is used from real fruit like dates and pomegranates and not corn or other industrial byproducts, which is really important to me because I'm really sensitive to ingredients and I don't have any issues with these. SALTR electrolytes are also lightly sweetened with stevia leaf extract and just enough to taste. My absolute favorite flavor right now is tart lime, but I've also been loving their salted caramel coffee flavor. It's actually what I have in my cup right now. I use 16 ounces of hot water and I stir in 1 packet of salted caramel coffee electrolytes. It is just delicious. They also have grapefruit and unflavored. So if you don't want any stevia or any flavors, this is the one for you. It's just sea salt and electrolytes. If you want to try SALTR for yourself, click on the link in the description below or use code LaurenJ at checkout to save 10%. Now let's get back to this interview. Are there physical symptoms or signs that we could look for to know, maybe I'm dealing with this, that, maybe I should go get things checked out?
Honestly, this is where it's really important to have blood markers involved. You know, the woman that was 110 pounds and type 2 diabetic, um, she actually, so she wished that she gained weight because we're a vain society. If you're putting on 20, 30, 40 extra pounds, you're going to start addressing that problem, right? She never did put on that extra weight, and she never addressed the problem. She's ate garbage all the time. And guess what? She actually burned out her beta cells, and now she's like type 1 and type 2, because she never addressed the problem because she never gained, in the mirror, it always looked fine still. But if she was looking at her blood markers much earlier, she would realize yeah, this is not good. I've got my insulin's through the roof, my triglycerides are through the roof, your glucose is through the roof, your body is struggling. Um, and again, you may not notice that on the outside, not right away. Once you get it to the where you're burning out your beta cells and everything, and now you're like having episodes of hypoglycemia or whatever, and yeah, okay, then you're gonna notice it, but you can address it so much earlier if you're watching blood markers.
Yeah, that's a good reminder to go to the doctor every year and get your blood work checked, especially if you're concerned about these things. Now, say someone
Yeah,
has lipotoxicity and, they're working with you and you're helping them. What steps would you take to help them heal from it?
lower the dietary fat. I mean, as simple as that. The thing when you eat fat, and again, we are in no way anti-fat. Like, we eat lots of fat. We just use fat as it's not a one size fits all. We all have different goals. We all have different activity levels. Everybody is different. And so you can't have a one size fits all for your macros. Your macros are going to be different for, me and Dr. Baker. Dr. Baker uh, is 2 to 3 times my size and muscle mass. He needs a lot more protein in a day than I do, right? So my protein macro needs to be different than his. Uh, my fat macro also needs to be different because he's way more active than I am. And so, you need to adjust those macros based on your goals. And in this case, you can't add the stick of butter. You can't eat the super fatty steaks and whatnot. You need to eat some leaner ones so that your body can shrink those fat cells enough to reverse the insulin resistance. And so, when you eat dietary fat, there's really only three places it can go, right? The fat can either go straight through you, right through your GI tract. It can get it digested, in which case it either is burned as fuel in your cells or it gets stored in your fat cells, your adipose tissue. That's it. That's the only places it can go. Well, the straight through you argument, unless you're eating like hundreds of grams of fat in a meal, it's getting absorbed. There was a study, and I can share with you to add to the notes if you want, that took, I think it was from the protein and carbs were exactly the same, and they changed the fat macro in meals from like 62 grams a day to 150 grams in the day of dietary fat. And they they took all the fecal matter and analyzed how much fat was getting to the fecal matter, and it only went from like 1 gram to like 2.9 grams for an extra 90 grams of fat in the diet. So your
Wow.
body is digesting the fat it eats, and it really should, right? Like, again, back to those normal northern climates. If we were just passing a bunch of fat through our stool when we ate high fat, we wouldn't store enough fat to make it through the winter. You got to store that fat on the body, right? And everybody talks about 150,000 years ago, our early ancestors were these carnivores, right? They eat primarily animal proteins. How did and this is like northern European climates, like the early, humans. If they could eat all the fatty meat they wanted and never stored fat, how would they make it through the winter? You
Hmm.
have to store fat, right, to make it through the winter, and they did that through eating a lot of fat, and so the fat ends up stored in your fat cells if you eat more of it than your body needs at that time.
That's really interesting. Now, why do you think that this isn't discussed more often in the carnivore community? You tell or you hear people say, eat more fat, eat a whole stick of butter with your lunch. But this is something I feel like there should be a little caution or a little warning sign about this because it sounds like it could be dangerous. Why do you think it's not talked about more often?
I'm not sure, it seems like there's a almost dogmatic approach that's developed where it's like everybody's gotta do it this way and that's it, and, one thing I've learned from my history, I mean, I've been eating keto for, uh, 20 almo 8, 19, 20 years. I was eating carnivore for 7 plus years for my Lyme disease, and resulting SIRS and everything, pain. Um, and what I learned in this journey with Lyme, with SIRS, is that number one, carnivore harder is not always the answer. I mean, I did everything from the diet side possible, and it's not gonna kill the Lyme disease. That's something that came externally. It's not gonna fix my mold issues, right? Those are other factors that have to be addressed. Um, and carnivore harder is not gonna help with that. You gotta look at other solutions. And so when I look at it as far as this lifestyle, yes, it's great, it's powerful, but it's also very individual. Everybody's gonna have a different journey. They have to find what works for them. And the thing that frustrates me more than anything is that if they're just offering you a one size fits all approach, you're gonna have so many people, and we get these people almost daily that come to us and say, "Carnivore didn't work for me. All I did was gain 20 pounds." Well, you're pushing somebody away from a lifestyle that could help them because you're being dogmatic about it's got to be this one approach to carnivore. Well, if you we take those people all the time. We just say, you know what? Instead of two fatty ribeyes for your day, make the first one a tenderloin, and then this, one of those two meals, make it a tenderloin, make it a leaner meal. And guess what? They start shedding weight. They feel amazing, and it works. And so, you gotta look at what works for you.
That makes a lot of sense, tailoring it to yourself and your needs. And I think that there's no harm in not eating super fatty meals all day, every day, especially if
Yeah.
lipotoxicity is a concern for you,
Yeah.
to just dial it back a little bit and, chicken, turkey, fish, or other options, not just steak and ribeyes that, people can use. So I think that's also
And
great that you mentioned that they can just adjust it.
yeah, and the spectrums into other diets. Like, we are low carb, keto, carnivore agnostic. You find what works for you and what you can live with long term, and that's the best diet for you. And so if it means adding back in some plants and some carbohydrates to, as you dial back the fat a bit to find where your body stays in that nice maintenance point, but you're not over flooding the fat side of it or whatever it might be. Those are all great tools to find what works for you. And again, back to what you mentioned about adding sticks of butter, and it, we have to also, again, back to individual. A postmenopausal woman with a history of obesity and likely leptin resistance, who's 100 pounds overweight, should never eat the same food as a very tall, very lean influencer eating sticks of butter, right? Because
Yeah.
they're completely different situations, right? A young person who can get away with that because they're active and very lean and in maintenance versus somebody trying to lose weight who has leptin resistance and doesn't get that I'm full signal as the same as other people, and trying to shed 100 pounds, you have to have a different diet.
You made a great point just now. Do you think that physical activity can help avoiding lipotoxicity? So if you are eating a higher fat carnivore diet, for example, but you're a very active person, you're playing sports or running around with your children, do you think that that can help negate some of the effects?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the piece that we always promote is strength training, because as you build muscle, not only does your BMR go up, so you can eat more. Muscle burns more calories all day long, so you can eat more food just to maintain. Um, you also give more storage space for glucose, so you give glucose more place to be stored, right? And that means you can have better controlled glucose levels and all of that. And so it's really kind of a two-piece solution to insulin resistance reversal: is maintain or grow your muscle and shrink your fat cells. And doing those together just increases storage capacity for both and makes you more metabolically flexible and reverses a lot of those situations. Dr. Noakes, we were just recently, I spoke down in Cape Town at Dr. Noakes' event, and I was my presentation was on lipotoxicity. Dr. Noakes was basically on glucotoxicity. His whole presentation was on, if your glycogen stores are filled and you have lots of glucose coming in, it gets turned into fat and spilled over and causes all these metabolic effects. Well, we were basically both talking the exact same language on different coins, right? I was talking the fat side where your fat cells are overstuffed, and now you got spillover, and he's talking on the glucose side where your glycogen stores are stuffed and you have spillover. They're really the same thing.
Yeah, and I like that everything ties in together, insulin resistance, lipotoxicity, it's all based on what you're eating and then how it's affecting your body. And I
Yeah.
think that you've had a lot of really great points. Now, I have another question. This is a little bit of a hot topic. Do you think that calories matter when you're on a carnivore diet? Is that something that we should be paying attention to?
So I'm a electrical engineering background. So I love science. I love the technical aspects of all of this, but I I think it's semantics. Okay. So does energy matter? Of course it does. How you characterize that energy, whether it's, calories, whether it's carbons in, carbons out, call it that, CICO, instead of the traditional, let's call it carbons in, carbons out, because that's you're tracking the carbon in and out of your body, and that is mass. And a lot of people say you eat mass, not calories. Well, Einstein said that mass and energy are the same thing. So you're you're really just splitting hairs. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about having too much energy coming into your system that you either don't have storage capacity for or you're not burning. And and so in that context, the content of the calories or the composition of them, the macros, the protein, carbs, and fat, are super important because protein is generally not used as a fuel unless it's basically a fuel of last resort, if you will. If you don't have enough fat on the body, and this is something people will say, if you just eat lean meat, you'll have rabbit starvation. You won't have energy, right? Well, there's this. If you're 100 pounds overweight, you have 100 pounds of fat as energy on your body. So rabbit starvation really only happens when you don't have enough energy on your body, and you're not getting enough energy from carbs or fat from the diet. That's when rabbit starvation happens. If you are overweight, you've got a ton of energy on the body. The body will just tap into that and use it. It's not a concern.
I'm sure that'll be a relief to some people as well that are concerned about lipotoxicity. Do you
Yeah.
have a starting goal with protein to fat ratios that you tell people to just begin with?
We typically don't do the ratios or the like percentages and those kind of things. We just go with straight grams of protein, fat, and carbs. And so carbs, we typically say, if you're trying to lose weight, 20 grams or less carbs. Protein is going to be based on your lean mass. So a good rule of thumb for that is to eat. I mean, there's a couple ways to look at it. I mean, one that's pretty good is just 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. That's one way to do it. So if you want to get to 120 pounds, eat 120 grams of protein. Another way to look at it is uh, for at a 5 foot tall woman, eat about 90 grams of protein, and then for every inch above that, add another 5 grams. So if you're 5'6", that'd be an extra 30, so 120 grams of protein. Um, and then for a man, start at about 100 grams and add 5 grams per pound above 5 foot. There's just a couple of rule of thumbs. We also have a free macro calculator that does it automatically for you.
I bet that's really helpful too. Now, are there certain foods
And then,
that
sorry,
carnivores
sorry, I just realized I
Go ahead.
didn't answer the third part, which is fat.
Oh,
So the fat
go
part,
ahead.
highly. So those are kind of set, right? Carbs low, protein based on your lean mass. What's left to vary? Again, the individual approach, the amount of dietary fat, right? So how much fat you eat really depends on your goals and your situation, and that's where you start to adjust up or down based on how your body feels, how you're losing weight.
That's good to know. Are there certain foods that carnivores specifically should avoid if they want fat loss?
Yeah. So, one of the reasons we find that a lot of people struggle with weight loss on carnivore, and a lot of times it's those postmenopausal women that typically struggle is probably the biggest group of them that have issues with it. A lot of times it's the dairy, and so what happens is, regardless of diet, one of the first things we will tell people if weight loss is their goal is to cut 100% of the dairy, and that helps a lot of people, no matter what their diet is on the diet spectrum. And so when they eat carnivore, dairy is one of the things that makes it more interesting, right? Having cheese on your burger, or having, you know, butter on a steak, like that makes it more, easy to stick with and all that kind of stuff. So cutting out 100% of dairy when you're already strict to carnivore can be tough for people, but that will help with weight loss.
For those that want to lose weight, should they be doing higher protein, lower fat?
Yeah, and again, it depends on the person. If they're eating whatever way they're eating and they're having weight loss and they feel great, great, keep doing it. Uh, but if you're stalled, or if back to the examples of the people we get that come to us all the time, we've had people that are, one woman was like 280 pounds and she gained 20 pounds. That's never good. Again, back to personal fat threshold. If you're close to your personal fat threshold and you put on 10 pounds, 20 pounds, that's never healing. And people will say, you're just healing. Your body's healing when you're putting on that weight. Part of healing is weight loss, especially if you're close to your fat threshold. If you're at that lipotoxicity level, losing body fat is the number one thing you have to do to heal. And so adding more is only going to make things worse. And so you can heal and lose weight at the same time. Just all you got to do is dial down the dietary fat a bit, up the protein a bit, and you can do both, right? And if you look at it from a healing standpoint, when I think about healing, I think about vitamins and minerals that the body, nutrient dense foods. I think about protein, which is, your amino acids to build and repair tissue, and some energy, of course, is fuel the process. But where does all the vitamins, minerals, and protein come from? It comes from the lean part of the protein. It doesn't come from the fat. The fat actually has very little vitamins and minerals compared to the protein part of the steak. And so you get more protein, you get more vitamins and minerals, you get more amino acids. Those are healing in my view.
If someone right now is listening and is stalled in their progress, specifically on carnivore, what would you suggest that they change today where they can start seeing results? I know you've said adjusting things, but do you have like top 3 tips or something that you usually go by for everyone?
Well, if you're not losing weight, start with cutting dairy. And then after that, just like I said, it doesn't have to be, you know, we do something called protein sparing modified fast days. It's basically just all protein, almost no carbs, and just a little bit of fat, 20 to 30 grams to absorb fat soluble vitamins and all those kind of things. Those are like alternates to fasting. So if you eat nothing for 1 or 2 days in a week, this is a great alternative because eating nothing, you start to lose lean mass. And so eating just protein, you get a lot of benefits without losing any lean mass, without losing muscle. And you just use it as a tool like you would fasting. You don't fast all the time. You just use it occasionally, right? That's a great tool, but you don't even have to go there if you don't want to. Again, if you're eating high fat all day long, 2 meals or whatever it might be, just change one of them to leaner. Change one of those meals to leaner and see how it works. And if you want to try doing in one day, do 2 lean meals instead of the 2 higher fat ones, try that. And I think you'll see better results.
That's really helpful. Now, Craig, if someone watching wants to work with you or your lovely wife, Maria, where can they find you so that they can get help?
Ketomaria.com is pretty much, I made that little page to link to all of our social media accounts, all of our websites and everything. So ketomaria.com, you can get to everything.
Okay. I'll link that down below as well as all your social media and everything. But Craig,
Thank you.
thank you so much for being here today and sharing where fat can help and where it can hurt. I know this will help a lot of people and it'll help clear up a lot of confusion that we have around this topic. So we really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on, Lauren. Appreciate it.
Friends, if this blew your mind or challenged some things you thought you believed in, do me a favor, hit the like button and tap subscribe, and leave a comment with your biggest question or your experience with carnivore. To see more of my day-to-day life, private moments, what I eat on the carnivore diet, and how I healed, follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, linked in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.